Have not asked for your bill, and let's start this. If your bill got out of committee Monday afternoon or yesterday, it is not on any sheet. Do not ask for it, so that we go tearing through all this stuff trying to look for it. You will come back Friday morning and ask for it. Everybody okay? If you have not asked for a bill, move on down. Heck, fire, nobody moved. You're the only one that's going to get a bill on. I want to make a little record. Hello. If the line don't shut up, you'll all be asked to leave. I want to make a recognition of some guests we have back here. Mr. Smyrie and Mr. Hughley have Ms. You drive a Corvette? I can't tell. Well, Mr. Hughley is back there, so I'm pretty close here. But Ms. Hughley and Ms. Smyrie have a group of Don Parson, never mind. Ever who these two people are down here on that row, they have some guests here. It's the Sigma Pi Phi fraternities. I think it's the parents and maybe some members. Their children are going to be working for us today as pages and other things. Would y'all please give them a little recognition clap? And I want him to stand up again. Mr. Hughley. This is Carolyn's husband, and that's the group that they brought with them. Thank y'all for coming. All right, quick. I don't want to know a lot about your bill. Mr. Kidd. Any questions, Mr. Kidd? 180. The microphone machine is not working, so I would suggest speak up a little bit. Mr. Harbin, I'm glad to see you. Where have you been? Okay. Mr. Parsons.
All right, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to break your rule, but I figure I've been here long enough to break a rule once in a while, so you can tell me if I'm out of order, get out of line. But I do have two bills I've asked for before. 201 has to do with the PSC administering a program to get telephonic equipment to people who are deaf. They can't do that. They can't get that wireless equipment to them. And it's just wireless equipment. They can't do that unless we change the law. There's, I think, some misinformation about that, but they can't do that unless we change the law this year. You'd have to wait till next year. The other is 289. This is just extending a exemption on the motor fuel tax on public transportation and university transportation. This is a taxpayer bill. We're actually saving the taxpayer from having to pay that motor fuel tax, and I would appreciate y'all's consideration and get those on the calendar.
No questions. And the microphones that aren't working are y'all's. So Mr. Nix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, one bill that's been asked for before, 374, just adds forestry to the list of equipment that would be exempted from ad valorem taxes when in dealer inventory, and that's at the bottom of page 4, House Bill 374. Then the new one today is on the last page next to the bottom, House Bill 566. This is where we're making some small changes in the district maps as some adjustments here at the mid-cycle. 566.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm excited to be here today for the first time giving you a non-education bill, which is wonderful. I'm here representing the Motor Vehicle Committee, their annual Auto Prestige Tag Update. It's on modified structure, page 2, House Bill 48, and we're taking 5 prestige tags, and we're one for disabled veterans, for surviving spouse, and we're asking that, and even a tag for motorcycles. So I ask your favorable consideration for the annual Motor Vehicle Tag Update, House Bill 48.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring to you today House Bill 393. It's in the middle of page 3, modified, structured, LC 391022. It also has an amendment, Mr. Chairman, AM 390105. This is an agreement that has been struck between the Georgia Automobile Dealers Association and Tesla is the primary person that's involved to allow them to continue to operate in Georgia. Georgians can avail themselves of the technology. A compromise is when everybody doesn't get, when no party gets exactly what they want, but this is a good compromise that was worked on in good faith between those two parties, and I ask the committee's consideration to put that on the calendar. To address the amendment to the Scribner's errors primarily, and this was also agreed upon to get back to the exact language that the parties agreed on. We had to do the bill quickly to get to Chairman Rice's committee meeting Monday afternoon, and there were just 2 slight errors that need to be corrected.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, page 3, House Bill 343. This bill only affects Lamar County. Lamar County School Board requested that they be made nonpartisan. I told them to get me a resolution signed by everybody. It's been advertised in the paper. It's also been printed on the front page of the paper, and I've had one person to ask me one thing about it. Just affects Lamar County School Board.
No questions. Thank you.
Ask for your favorable consideration.
Mr. Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 4, 5 from the top, House Bill 517 is identical to the bill you just had. It's Eccles County Board of Education, requesting to be nonpartisan. I also have a resolution from the board and advertised in the paper. No phone calls against it, so I appreciate your favorable consideration.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, modified structure, 7th down, House Bill 535, the brunch bill. It allows local governments where Sunday sales are already legal to extend hours by 2 hours in restaurants. That 2-hour extension will result in $100 million in additional taxable sales. 535.
No questions. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May it please the committee. I have one bill on for the first time today. That's House Bill 295 under modified structure, page 3, the 6th down from the top. Mr. Chairman, this is a Secretary of State cleanup bill. This bill updates our code to allow limited liability companies to serve as registered agents for corporate entities. Currently, all other entities can serve except LLCs, and that is because this code was actually written before we acknowledged the LLC entity in Georgia. So this brings our code up to date and was at the request of the Secretary of State.
No questions.
Thank you. I ask for your favorable consideration.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Middle of the 3rd page under modified structured, HB 342 represents months of discussion and eventual compromise between the nursing home industry, the trial lawyers, and patient advocates. And it says that where there are certain payer guidelines that nursing homes are subject to, and it's saying that now violations of those payer guidelines won't result in a per se negligence charge during trial.
No question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Today I bring you House Bill 426. It's on page 4, second from the bottom, under structured rules. This is a tax exemption for the federally qualified health centers. We have 157 clinics throughout 89 counties within the state. It's very beneficial, and it will actually be a great beneficial return on investment for the state. I ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Mr. Brockway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A new bill that's arrived on your blue sheet today under modified structured on page 3 toward the bottom there, House Bill 414. Protects student data, keeps it private and secure. We've brought a lot of folks to the table from the tech sector and from the education industry to bring this together, and I think we've got a good bill to protect the privacy of student data. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to suggest, since Coach Ball Johnson's going to be here today and our great quarterback from Georgia Tech, Joe Hamilton's going to be here today, that this would be a fantastic day to add a technology bill to the supplemental calendar.
Mr. Dudgeon, have you got a technology bill? Apparently, there's nobody technological enough here to add one of those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On the first page, modified open rule, House Bill 322. This just adds a penalty for the late filing a deed under power after a foreclosure sale. I ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. No questions. Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, under modified structured, House Bill 98, the Georgia Code of Military Justice rewrite. I'm also asking for House Bill 263 on page 3, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council update, and House Bill 310, which is also on page 3, which is part of the governor's criminal justice reform package.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, it's always good to be before the Rules Committee. House Bill 238 under your structured is a sales tax exemption for renovation and expansion at the Georgia Aquarium. It's capped at $750,000 for the state's liability.
Wait a second.
And it's over 18 months. It has a start and end date. 238 under structure. 238.
Okay. No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 1, modified open. It's House Bill 232. It is a bill that addresses some basic code revisions designed to improve professional practices for hearing aid dispensers.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Got two bills for you. HB 228, which is on page 2, modified structure towards the bottom. This clarifies that fees collected in each county go to the county treasurer if the sheriff is paid on salary. This is a cleanup to a jury bill passed last year. We've got HB 437 on page 3, modified structure towards the bottom. This is clarifying and changing the membership makeup of the Glen Water and Sewer Commission and a name change for that organization. Appreciate your consideration.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, page 3 in the middle, HB 313, a bill to allow the grant 8 hours of additional paid leave to state employees to volunteer in our school system. Governor would like to be able to do that.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you HB 411. It's on the front page, third from the bottom. In this bill, we're just requesting to increase the gross vehicle weight for hauling unfinished forest products. these individuals will be required to pay a permit fee, and we're just trying to do this to put Georgia in line with our neighboring states.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring you House Bill 17, the Hidden Predator Act. It's on the second page, first one under modified structure. This bill essentially allows a path to justice for victims of child sexual abuse to bring their perpetrators to justice. It gets around Georgia's short civil statute of limitations. Georgia is the worst state in the country, and this would move the needle forward, and we would not be in that company with other states.
No questions. Thank you. Your microphone don't work, so just yell out. Okay. Mr. Dollar.
Thank you. I bring the same two bills as the past few days here. Near the top of the list on the first page, HB 245, dealing with condo associations, capping removing the cap that they can apply for special assessments. Second page, near the top, HB 540. This bill just changes the number that can serve on this committee. Currently, right now, the House is not in compliance with the law.
No questions. Y'all are wondering why I don't do any questions. It's a blank screen, so I don't know nothing. So no question. It's working out real good for today.
Thank you.
Mr. Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today House Bill 401. It's on the third page, about halfway toward the bottom. It's the first time this bill's been on the calendar. It's a department bill for the Department of Early Care and Learning. It includes cleanup language to address concerns and uncertainties that are in existing code. Passed unanimously out of subcommittee and the full Committee of Education, and I'm not aware of any opposition to the bill. I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Mabra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 500, second page, modified open at the very top of the second page. All this bill does is cleans up the issue of misclassifying workers, and it specifically defines what an independent contractor is. And I ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you a bill that you'll be seeing for the first time on your blue sheet, page 4, second from the top, HB 502, on behalf of the author, Representative Dudgeon. And then with permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to mention another bill.
Permitted.
On page 2, under modified structure, HB 17, on behalf of the author, Representative Spencer. I've expressed my support for that bill, and I'd like to go on record thanking the Judiciary Committee for their work in getting that bill in a form that it's here in rules today. Thank you.
Anything else? Have you got any bills that you'd like to say?
That's right. I'm just here on behalf of some hard-working House members.
He's got a bill. But I told him not to mention it. He's brought it in here 9 times.
No, sir, I'm not going to mention it. You told me not to.
I'm tired of hearing about it. Mr. Welt, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Welt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask for your favorable consideration HB 361 on page 1, down at the bottom. This is a part of the rewrite of the juvenile code. We are making further amendments to the juvenile code. This came out of the Judicial Council's recommendations. It also has a few tweaks in terms of dealing with 17-year-olds that have found themselves in Superior Court that need to be remanded back to juvenile court, and deals with the issue of traffic citations for 17-year-olds driving and then going to juvenile court. They really need to be in state court. That's what the bill does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 bills on the calendar. HB 264, which is the 7th down under the modified open rule, which is comes from the Georgia Child Support Commission and would repeal administrative legitimation among some other reforms. HB 405, which is the number 14 down under modified open, right down below it, which is part of the State Bar of Georgia legislative package, which would require prenuptial agreements to be in writing and would match requirements between marriage contracts and antenuptial agreements in the statute. But most importantly, I'm requesting that the committee put the Athens-Oconee delegation out of our misery on HB 367, which is on page 3, our 4th judgeship bill, so that the texts, calls, emails, and visits of our Superior Court judges will cease.
I think that's a good way to keep your phones busy.
Yes, sir.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It's actually my honor to be before the Rules Committee. It's been a long time. I bring to you House Bill 474. It's on the bottom of page 1 under modified open rule. This bill was brought to me by a number of startup charter schools, although it applies to conversion and state commission charter schools who are facing demographic changes. And what the bill does is just add under the groups for enrollment priorities, educationally disadvantaged students, and I added military students because of the transient population that they are. And that's all the bill does.
Thank you. Mr. Hightower, you don't get 3 minutes.
Thank you.
So don't try to explain your bill to anybody.
Mr. Chairman, on page 3, 8th down from the top, HB 303 deals with uninsured motorist coverage. Just goes to increase the penalty once an insurance company has been found to be in bad faith or acting in bad faith to their own client, their own customer.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I bring you HB 209. It's on the middle of the first page. This is simply a 2-sentence amendment that clarifies parental notification in the Special Needs Scholarship Act. There's no structural changes to the bill. It was extensively vetted by the Education Committee and is supported by the Department of Education.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring for you HB 81, which is our bill regarding super liens, trying to fix a pretty devastating issue where people are basically able to take houses away from folks. This is a bill that I worked very closely with the Georgia Association of Tax Officials on and various other interests.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was on page 4, first one under structured. Mr. Teasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Come to ask for House Bill 126, fourth one down under modified open rule. The Rules Committee's become my own personal Jericho, and so I'm here just to play the role of Joshua and ask for this GPS Freedom Bill.
Keep singing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Representative Denner for asking for House Bill 502, but I will ask for 2 bills. The last one under open rule on page 1, H.R. 473, is the study committee with the Senate on cybersecurity. And then the second bill, the second one on page 2 under modified structured, Georgia Right to Try Act will give more options to terminally ill patients.
That was 34?
34, yes, sir.
Okay. No questions. Thank you. Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come before you for HB 268. It's the second one on the third page. Basically, it provides additional protections for mandated reporters. Be happy to answer any questions.
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Baskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here again to ask for House Bill 297, which is number 3 under open rule. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I would appreciate your favorable consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions. Ms. Dickerson.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 131, which is on page 2, modified structured rule, halfway down the page. I come to ask for this bill and just wanted you to know that this bill was modified and endorsed by the Department of Education. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you'll look on the back of page 1 under modified structure, the 10th bill down, House Bill 169, simply gives those working to comply with the law in the 13 counties of the ARC a 30-day grace period to do so and get their tags renewed.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, page 4, I bring to you on the structured rule, HB 94. Second one down under structured. This just gives our brave men and women of the military, Mr. Chairman, some relief for being penalized from non-payment of ad valorem taxes on motor vehicles while they're defending our country.
No questions.
Thank you.
Debbie, or is the best for last? Is that what's coming? Ms. Buckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Open rule, the fifth one down, HR 303 on page 1. It is a resolution that is supported by the department to strengthen civics education.
No questions. Thank you. Okay. We're just going to go down the line. We've got a wireless mic. Just pass it after you've done. If you don't have one, just pass it. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple simple, non-controversial bills. On page 2, House Bill 194, early voting bill. And then on page 4, under structured, House Bill 243, an education savings account.
What was the second one?
Under structured, page 4, House Bill 243.
Okay. Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second page, House Bill 50, Monuments Bill. And I'd like to put my name beside HR 474 and House Bill 512.
The last one was what?
House Bill 512.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, House Bill 428, the zoo expansion bill extends their sunset on their expansion. Same page, House Bill 308 for mega site historic structure renovation. And page 2, House Bill 511 clarifies what pharmacy techs can do. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name beside Representative Hawkins, who's already asked for the bill, is on the way. House Bill 457, the boat inventory bill. And Representative Parsons, same page, House Bill 289.
Mr. Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for HB 271, a fantastic economic development bill that simply gives local school boards and the state the ability to authorize charter schools in the workplace where businesses can help support public education.
Mr. Willard.
Mr. Chairman, on page 4, I've got two bills I'd like to ask for the first time under the modified structured House Bill 527. This is just repealing a law that applies only to Fulton County. Is no longer necessary. It restricts how they can do budgeting and appropriation of funds. It should be something handled by ordinance, not by state laws. An old population bill that still applies to them. Second bill is House Bill 408, which is a tax measure dealing with hotel motel tax. It applies only to 2 cities. If we don't pass it, when the bonds are paid off the dome, city of Sandy Springs and Johns Creek will be in a hurt situation trying to continue their tax. That's it.
Just do backwards. Let's do this side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure, page 4, H.R. 36, H.R. 215, both are bridge and road naming bills. H.R. 519 is a bill dealing with my local technical college on a building naming. And put my name beside 411.
Beside which one?
411. First page.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to put my name beside HB 169, and then I don't see it on here. I don't know if it made it, but we did have 470 come out of committee. This is the PBM pharmacy bill. I want to make you aware of. As soon as we are eligible for that, that will fix the issues with the independent pharmacists as far as MAC pricing and the audit bill of rights.
Second. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill that I have been asking for, and I'm not sure everybody's in agreement or not, but it's House Bill 416. And then I would like to put my name next to House Bill 457, which is on page 5, that deals with all of our marina dealers throughout the state of Georgia.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask your consideration for H.R. 303 on page 1. Representative Buckner. Representative Mitchell has been asking for House Bill 115, the Foreclosure Cure Act, and Representative Kaiser, HB 474, the Charter Schools Enrollment Priorities Bill.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to request HB 500, the Employment Security Bill brought forward by Representative Mabra today. I would ask for favorable consideration of H.R. 474. It's a bill that I've requested creating a House Study Committee looking at grandparents and other relatives raising grandchildren. HB 131, these are all on page 2. HB 131, the End Cyberbullying Act by Representative Dickerson. And I'd like to put my name beside HB 401, Representative Festration's bill, as well as, I think that's it for today. Thank you.
Mr. Earhart. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name beside HB 457, as well as HB 500 and HB 115. Thank you.
What was the first one?
HB 500.
I got it. 450.
457 was the next one.
Okay, and the last one?
Last one was HB 115.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 1, first bill in the modified open, House Bill 3. That's the Todd Gurley bill that I've explained before. Mr. Chairman, also on page 3, middle of the page, House Bill 377, a bill that allows our courts to collect people that don't pay fines. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, on page 2 near the top of the page, House Bill 524. This is a trade name registry bill for our Superior Court clerks. It allows them to put online one of the last things our citizens cannot get to electronically for records in the courthouse. We actually passed this bill last year and the governor vetoed it. It had a $5 fee to allow this electronic system to be built. We worked with the governor's office, took that fee out, and it's the same bill with that one exception.
Come forward, give it to John, let him give it to Butch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the proper time, I want to second Chairman Knight's request for House Bill 470 at the proper time.
That will be tomorrow. Ms.
Thank
Dempsey.
you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, House Bill 288 to add 2 more positions is requested to the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, requested by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. And down at the bottom of the page, HB 443, the Voluntary Veterans Preference Employment Policy.
Mr. Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got just a handful of bills I want to ask for in support of 535, the brunch bill, Representative Harrell's bill. Margaret Kaiser.
Tell me where they are.
Page 4, 535, the brunch bill, Representative Harrell.
Okay.
535. Margaret, on page 1, HB 474, Margaret Kaiser's initiative.
Okay.
HB 401 on page 3, Representative Illustrations bill. And then page 1, HB 361, Representative Welch's bill.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 310 on page 2. It's part of the governor's criminal justice reform. Cleans up the Private Probation Act as prescribed by the Governor's Council on Criminal Justice Reform. I'd also like to,
it's on page 3, 310?
I'm sorry, page 3. Yes, sir.
310.
I'd also like to ask for House Bill 225. If I may back up on 310, there's an amendment, Rules Committee amendment that's put forth. It was explained the other day that it just does some cleanup work as a Rules Committee amendment. Also, I'd like to ask on page 2, House Bill 225, that's commonly called the Uber bill. After 2 years and wearing out 2 standing committees, Uber and Lyft has come to the table in agreement on this bill. Miracles never cease. There's also a Rules Committee amendment on that as prescribed by the Regulated Industries Committee that does clean up language that brings them all to the table. And I'd also like to put my name beside House Bill 535 on page 4, Mr. Harrell's bill.
Mr. Dixon.
On page 1, I'd like to put my name with House Bill 474. And on page 2, House Bill 131. And House Bill 225.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, House Bill 393, which is the Tesla compromise bill, I'd like to put my name beside that as amended. And on page 2, I'd also like to support House Bill 225, the Uber bill, along with, on page 2, House Bill 48, that tag bill that takes care of about 4 different things.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to attach my name to House Bill 17, the Hidden Predator Act. That's on page 2, the first bill under modified structure.
Mr. Powell. Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 279. That's the judicial pay raise bill. There's an amendment. It's AM 2375 that I would also ask for that to be attached to it. And I would ask for
HB 375, which deals with a plea of nolo contendere to a charge of suspended, canceled, or revoked registration, and would like to put my name by HB 342, which is on page 3, and also HB 238, which is on page 4.
They're not working. They're working?
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, I would like to ask for House Bill 436. That's the HIV syphilis offering of tests in the 3rd trimester. Those children born with HIV or syphilis cost the state hundreds of thousands of dollars. And on page 4, I'd like to ask for the physical therapy bill. It's House Bill 505. Thank you.
I've got on my notes. Okay. Y'all, I want y'all to all be aware of something. We have on our calendar today already 21 bills. You've got 6 carryovers, and then the 15 that we've got on there. I believe that you all know that there will be a supplemental calendar. That supplemental calendar will also have in the neighborhood of 20 bills on it. Friday, I'll do Fridays in just a minute. We'll do about 20 bills for the consideration calendar. And I think you all know that we will go in for a supplemental calendar, and I'll put some 20 more on there. If our addition is about right, because we can do somewhere between 33 and 40 bills if all the members will be short, quick, shut up, sit down. And it doesn't matter whether you put a Y or N up there, just let's vote them and get out. That's 60. As of yesterday afternoon, when I left here, we had 137 bills, and y'all know my little rating system, that would rate good enough to get on the floor. The math there means that there's going to be a few left off. We got next year, okay? When we have supplemental, this is for everybody. I don't want to see anybody on the wall. We'll make those decisions, and I don't need any more input on it. All right. This is Friday's calendar. Open rule. HB 297. Any opposed? It's on. Modified open. HB 21. Any opposed? It's on. Modified open. HB 322. Any opposed? It's on. Modified open. HB 474. Any opposed? It's on. Just kind of give me a run, 1 and 2. That's 4. Modified open. HB 510. Any opposed? Modified structure. HB 48. Any opposed? Modified structure. HB 131. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 268.
Move.
Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 342. Any opposition? So, modified structure, HB 343. Any opposed? So, modified structure, HB 375. Any opposed? So, okay. Under modified structure, we got HB 393, and on your desk, you've got the Amendment AM 390105. Again, this is to me, it's a technical thing. So what I want to do is approve the amendment. Do I hear a move? Any opposed to the amendment? All right. That will mean that we will have a rules substitute for 393. Earl didn't think I was going to get through that one. So we'll have that number on the floor for you. But 393 by rules substitute as amended for those four changes. Any opposed? All right. It's on. Under modified structure, HB 436. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 443. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 455. What? He doesn't want it? Never mind. He does not want his bill. 455. It's not on. No, we'll take her away. Under structured, HB 94. Any opposed? Under structured, HB 369. I'll get it. No, I'll wait. It's the first time he asked for it. Which one did I just do? Did we have a move on it? Any opposed? Under structured, HB 426. Any opposed? Under structured, HB 496. All right. How many is it? 18. And it was 455 that we took off. Is that So you can throw there's an amendment up here on that thing, so you can throw it away. Mr. Roberts, what were those resolutions again?
What for? Read them again.
HR 36.
All right, under modified structure, HR 36. Any opposition? HR 215. It's on HR 519. Okay. That's 21. So do the math. We got about 40 more that we could possibly do. Bye.